He walked Wall Street for years, not as a trader, not as a banker, but as a janitor. Ignored, mocked, invisible. But what they didn't see was that he was watching, learning, and building a future that would shake the very foundations beneath their $1,000 shoes. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever felt like your uniform, your job, or your past was used to measure your worth, this story is for you. Today we bring you the untold journey of Walter D. Ellis, the custodian of Wall Street, a powerful, emotional story of grit, intelligence, and a quiet rise to greatness. Before we dive in, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our inspiring stories. And to everyone who has liked, subscribed, or shared this video, may your life be filled with ease, your body with health, your heart with peace, and your path with clarity. May your debts be lifted, your burdens lightened, your worries resolved, and your prayers answered. May healing find those who are sick, and may blessings multiply for you and your loved ones. Amen. Amen. And may it be so. We'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below and tell us, what part of Walter's story resonated with you the most? What dreams are you still holding on to? Now, let's begin the story of a man who cleaned the floors of Wall Street, and one day bought the building. The city never really sleeps, but Wall Street slumbers in its own way. After the final trades have been made and the glowing monitors go dark, the echo of footsteps becomes sparse, replaced by the faint hum of servers and the squeak of rubber soles against polished marble. It's during these hours that Walter D. Ellis begins his work. The night shift. That's what they called it. Walter called it his silence. By the time the last trader slung his coat over his shoulder and disappeared into the Manhattan night, Walter was already changing into his faded blue jumpsuit in the tiny basement locker room. His scuffed work boots waited loyally beneath the bench, stained from years of hard floors and harsh chemicals. A name patch clung to his chest, the embroidery frayed, W. Ellis. He moved through the building with a quiet precision. Elevator to the 40th floor. Mop, bucket, trash cart. No wasted movement. No noise if he could help it. The building, sleek and towering, belonged to another world. Glass walls, Italian tile, mahogany doors, and the people inside it barely noticed the man who swept their crumbs and emptied their wastebaskets. At 52, Walter had grown comfortable in his invisibility. There was a kind of freedom in being overlooked. He didn't mind the way eyes slid past him in the hallways. He didn't flinch at the occasional muttered insult or dismissive nod. He stored it all, not in bitterness, but in a quiet archive somewhere deep within. Not forgotten. Simply observed. In his brown bag lunch that night was a cold chicken sandwich, an apple, and a folded copy of an article on market volatility that he'd clipped from the financial section of a discarded newspaper. He read it under the dim light of a break room no one else used at that hour, eyes scanning the columns like a man solving a puzzle. His fingers, calloused and cracked, flipped the paper with care. There was a certain rhythm to his evenings. Clean the West Wing offices first. Always start with the trading floor. That's where the richest conversations were. Walter had become a master of silent eavesdropping. As he vacuumed or wiped down desks, his ears soaked in the language of money, quarterly projections, emerging markets, liquidity trap. It was a different dialect from the one he grew up with in Harlem, but he'd learned to speak it fluently, even if he never uttered a word aloud. During his 10-minute breaks, he jotted notes on old receipts and scrap paper. Not observations of spills or stains, but thoughts on earnings calls and interest rates. He scribbled equations, shorthand reminders, and questions to research later. And he studied, every night. After his shift ended at 4 in the morning, he'd return to his tiny studio apartment in the Bronx. There, amid the buzz of the radiator and the distant rumble of the subway, he read by lamplight. The Intelligent Investor was dog-eared and filled with margin notes. His copy of Common Stocks and Uncommon Profits had a cracked spine and pages smudged with the fingerprints of a man who studied the market like a theologian studying scripture. Once upon a time, Walter Ellis had dreamed of Wall Street from a school desk in Harlem. His mother, a cafeteria worker at a public elementary school, had raised him and his younger sister, Camille, alone. He was a math prodigy back then. Numbers danced for him. Algebra, calculus, it all came naturally. His teacher said he had a gift. Princeton had even sent him a letter. Not an acceptance, he hadn't applied. Just an invitation to consider. But the day his mother died, everything changed. Walter was 18. Camille was 10. There was no debate. He dropped out, got a job at a local hardware store, and raised his sister like a father. Wall Street became a ghost of an idea, something he locked away along with his scholarship dreams. Now, decades later, Walter moved through that gleaming building like a shadow. present but unacknowledged. He swept under Bloomberg terminals and vacuumed around $10,000 leather chairs. The young men in tailored suits never asked his name. Some joked at his expense. One of them, Brandon Keller, liked to say, "Careful not to trip over the janitor's dreams," whenever Walter passed by. Laughter always followed. Walter never responded. He had no time for empty pride. At night, he logged onto his battered laptop, an old model rescued from a recycling bin, and reviewed his online brokerage account. The numbers were small but growing. He bought undervalued stocks in sectors others ignored. He held long when the herd panicked. He made slow, steady moves, nothing flashy. He wasn't chasing riches. He was testing a theory. And with every passing month, his confidence grew. In the world above, investors made million-dollar gambles fueled by instinct, caffeine, and ego. Walter preferred data. He liked facts, patterns, patience. He was playing the long game. And no one saw him coming. The winter of 2003 settled over New York like a gray, relentless hush. Snow clung to gutters and fire escapes, turning the edges of the Bronx into frozen sculpture. Walter Ellis didn't mind the cold. It meant fewer distractions, fewer crowds, and more time to think as he walked the 30 blocks from his apartment to the subway each night. His building was small, wedged between a shuttered corner store and a laundromat that still ran on quarters. The elevator hadn't worked in years and Walter never complained. He lived on the third floor in a studio that smelled faintly of old books and bleach. The radiator hissed like a grumbling cat, and the windows rattled when the wind picked up. But the space was his. The bookshelf, though sagging, held more knowledge than the average analyst's MBA. Old textbooks rescued from library donation bins lined the shelves. Titles like Principles of Corporate Finance, The Alchemy of Finance, You Can Be a Stock Market Genius. Notes were tucked between their pages like pressed flowers, written in pencil, underlined, questioned, and reworked over and over. Walter's evenings followed ritual. A thermos of black coffee. Classical music playing low on a crackling radio. One eye on his computer screen, the other on his ledger. A thick, spiral-bound notebook with a cover worn smooth. In it he tracked his trades. Nothing automated. No apps or bots. Just him, his mind, and the markets. He recorded everything. Not just numbers but reasoning. Why he bought shares in a struggling paper company. Why he stayed away from biotech despite the hype. He wrote down his fears. His doubts. He recorded patterns and wrote mock dialogues between fictional investors to test ideas aloud. His first real win came quietly. It was a small company, a Midwest steel manufacturer, overlooked and undervalued. Walter had read its quarterly reports cover to cover, noting an uptick in overseas contracts, a strategic acquisition no one was talking about. The stock was cheap, dirt cheap. He took a risk, $200 from a rainy day fund he'd been building since Camille graduated from college. 3 months later, the stock tripled. He didn't celebrate. He logged the gain, studied the aftermath, and reinvested. By day, Walter was still the invisible man. Still mopping floors and emptying bins while investment bankers argued about volatility and risk appetite. But by night, something was shifting. The numbers in his account no longer felt hypothetical. They breathed. They moved. They obeyed him. He used the quiet of the janitorial closet as a second office. Among the cleaning supplies and old light bulbs, he kept a small box, just a shoebox really, where he stored his best notes. Pages of scribbles, equations, theories. He even began outlining something bigger. His own investment model, tailored for long-term growth with a focus on timing and undervaluation. He gave it a name, though he told no one, the Ellis ratio. By 2006, Walter had tripled his portfolio. Not through luck, but through the sheer force of study and discipline. He still walked to the train. Still brought his lunch in a brown bag. Still wore the same boots, now repaired with duct tape along one sole. But he no longer felt stuck. He felt like a man preparing for a test no one knew he was taking. One night, while cleaning a conference room, he overheard a group of traders discussing the real estate bubble. Most laughed it off, dismissing concerns. Everyone's making money. That's all that matters, one said. Walter didn't speak, but he wrote it down. That night, he pulled housing data from the Federal Reserve and compared it to wage growth. The numbers didn't match. They hadn't matched in a long time. He stopped investing in real estate-related stocks the following week. At work, Brandon Keller kept up his antics. By now, the young trader had graduated from smirks to open jabs. "Hey, Ellis," he called one night, tossing a crumpled napkin toward Walter's bucket. "Think you can polish my desk next? Might get you closer to a raise." Laughter followed. Walter just smiled. Not the weak kind. The quiet kind. The kind that knows the future and doesn't need to explain it. That weekend, Walter launched a blog. He wrote his first post under the name WD Investor, publishing a 5-paragraph analysis of why a certain telecommunications company was wildly overvalued. He cited data, explained fundamentals, and offered an alternative pick. His tone was calm, focused, almost scholarly. He shared the link in a small online investment forum and went to bed. By morning, it had 42 views. By the end of the month, 500. Nothing viral. No overnight fame. But in the comments were phrases like insightful breakdown, where did you learn this? And following for more. Walter replied to each one politely, never revealing who he was or what he did by day. Every post became sharper. He analyzed market movements, broke down trends, warned against hype. His writing was methodical but accessible. He wasn't trying to impress hedge fund managers. He was trying to teach. The shoebox in the closet grew thicker. The blog gained readers. The account balance crept higher. The world remained unaware. But the janitor was making moves. The financial towers of Manhattan rose like steel spines against the sky, glowing with the energy of belief in growth, in profit, in the illusion of control. But beneath their bright facades, beneath the hum of trading algorithms and echoing investor calls, something darker stirred. It was early 2007. The markets were still euphoric, dancing on the edge of a cliff no one wanted to see. Credit flowed like water. Mortgages were sold to anyone who could breathe. Banks piled risk upon risk, and on television, financial pundits laughed off concerns with bright teeth and confident nods. Walter Ellis watched it all from a folding chair in his apartment, the glow of the laptop screen casting long shadows on the walls. His blog, WD Investor, had quietly built a following. A few hundred readers had grown into a few thousand. Some wrote to ask for tips, others to challenge him. But more and more they came to listen. Walter didn't post often, only when he had something to say. He analyzed subprime mortgage patterns and lending reports from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. He compared delinquency rates with historical averages. He didn't shout his findings. He laid them out like a careful surgeon, methodical and clear. In one post titled "The Cracks Beneath Us," he wrote, "When credit becomes the drug and collateral is a whisper, the crash is no longer a question of if, but when. Watch the adjustable rates. Watch the silence from the lenders. They know." The comments section exploded. Some readers praised his foresight. Others accused him of fear-mongering. But his subscriber count doubled in 3 days. By then, Walter was no longer just surviving. His portfolio was growing, shaped by careful moves and timely retreats. When others jumped into the housing craze, he shifted his focus to consumer staples and gold. He bought small positions in utilities and pulled entirely out of bank stocks. He never once borrowed money to invest. The janitor in the night was outmaneuvering men in $1,000 suits, and still polishing their desks without a word. Back at the office, the tone had shifted. Brandon Keller, once untouchable, had begun to falter. A few of his trades had gone south. Rumors of missed targets spread through the hallways. His jokes at Walter's expense became louder, more desperate. "You read that blog nonsense again, old man?" he scoffed one evening as Walter mopped the glass entryway. "You know nobody cares what a janitor thinks about the markets, right?" Walter simply nodded. That night, he received an email from someone new, a venture capitalist named Ethan Mandel, based in Brooklyn. The subject line read, "WD Investor. Who are you?" Walter hesitated before opening it. "Been following your blog for months. You called the slump in housing before anyone I know. I run a small firm. Nothing flashy. But you got a mind for this. Ever thought about managing money for real?" Walter stared at the screen. His hands hovered over the keyboard, uncertain. For a long moment, he sat still, the radiator clinking behind him like ticking time. He didn't respond. Not yet. In the weeks that followed, the markets began to crack. Stocks dipped, then bounced, then dipped again. News anchors fumbled for words as banks revised forecasts and housing prices slumped. Walter's posts became required reading in a few corners of the internet. A financial blogger referenced him. Then another. A few hedge fund interns even argued about his predictions on Reddit. But Walter never revealed his name. Not even to Ethan Mandel. Not until the fall of 2008. Lehman Brothers collapsed in September, sending shockwaves through the economy. Stocks plunged. Investors panicked. Suits ran through Wall Street with hollow eyes. In the janitor's closet, Walter opened his shoebox and pulled out a manila folder. Inside were documents he'd prepared months earlier. A strategy for wealth preservation during a liquidity crisis, a list of industries with historically low correlation to market crashes, and a 2-page draft proposal for a boutique investment firm. He took the train to Brooklyn on a gray Thursday morning, wearing his best collared shirt and a clean jacket. It was the first time in years he'd taken a day off. Ethan Mandel's office was modest, brick walls, second floor above a bakery, a view of the East River. Ethan was younger than Walter expected, maybe late 30s, sharp but not arrogant. When Walter introduced himself, there was a pause, then a slow smile. "I figured you weren't some Ivy League fund manager," Ethan said. "Your writing's too humble." Walter handed him the folder without a word. They read it together line by line. For 2 hours they spoke of markets and history, of cycles and communities. Walter explained his Ellis ratio. Ethan leaned in, hungry for more. By the time Walter left, a quiet partnership had begun. Back in Manhattan, chaos reigned. The firm where Brandon worked had lost millions. Rumors of layoffs filled the elevators. And Walter Ellis, still scrubbing conference tables, had just taken the first step toward becoming something else. Something undeniable. That night, he wrote a final blog post under the name WD Investor. "I've walked these halls unseen, listened while they laughed, studied while they slept. The storm has come. But storms too pass. What matters is what we build after. And who gets to build it." Then he closed the laptop and began building. The air in Harlem smelled like history, like hot brick and corner deli grease, like subway steam and street music. Walter Ellis returned there not with nostalgia but with purpose. It was spring of 2009, just months after the crash, and Wall Street was still bleeding. But Walter was planting seeds. He kept a low profile. Still took the subway, still wore the same heavy boots, though now without duct tape. His investments had weathered the storm. Where others lost fortunes, Walter had preserved his, grown it even. Ethan Mandel's faith had paid off. They formed a private partnership. Walter insisted on one thing, that the firm bear his name, Ellis Capital. They rented a small space near 125th Street. Exposed brick, 2 desks, and a chalkboard mounted to the back wall. Ethan brought the contacts. Walter brought the strategy. Together they built a portfolio from the ashes, targeting undervalued companies, clean balance sheets, and most importantly, opportunities for long-term growth in places big investors ignored. Walter's vision was clear from the beginning. Ellis Capital would be more than a firm. It would be a vehicle for economic rebirth, starting in Harlem, then the Bronx, and then wherever working people had been forgotten by the systems that claimed to represent them. He pored over data late into the night. When Ethan went home, Walter stayed. He tracked small businesses crushed by the recession and mapped paths for their recovery. He identified industries overlooked by big firms, independent grocers, niche manufacturers, urban agriculture startups, and began to allocate capital with surgical precision. The fund didn't chase returns. It cultivated them. And it worked. In a year, their assets tripled. Investors took notice, not hedge fund titans but pension managers from local unions, small-time partners from Brooklyn law firms, and even a retired subway conductor who'd read Walter's blog and showed up with a folder of handwritten savings goals. Ellis Capital took them all. One by one, the pieces of Walter's dream began to click into place. He established a community investment wing focused on financial literacy. Twice a month, he led Saturday workshops in a borrowed high school gym. He stood at a whiteboard in front of teens, single moms, immigrants, ex-cons, teaching them about savings rates, market cycles, the power of compound interest. He wrote pamphlets in plain language. No buzzwords. No Wall Street gloss. Just truth. He also hired from within. A former janitor named Jose from his old building became their office manager. A young single mother from the Bronx, fresh out of community college, was trained as a research analyst. Walter treated them with the respect he had long been denied, offering mentorship, not charity. His face remained unknown to most. In meetings, Ethan often led with clients. Walter didn't mind. He watched, learned, and then, when the timing was right, spoke with the authority of a man who had studied the markets not from a podium, but from the floor, literally. And yet, even in success, he never forgot. Every morning, he still rose before sunrise. Still brewed coffee from the same dented percolator. Still packed a sandwich in wax paper, though now it was tucked beside a Mont Blanc pen and a leather-bound journal. His corner apartment in the Bronx remained the same, even as his net worth quietly climbed into 7 figures. Not out of modesty, out of mission. Meanwhile, back on Wall Street, Brandon Keller had clawed his way back into a mid-level role after the crisis wiped out his old team. He hadn't seen Walter in over a year. To him, the janitor had vanished into the wind, irrelevant. But the wind was shifting. In 2012, Ellis Capital made a bold move, a strategic investment in renewable infrastructure across low-income areas in Queens and northern Manhattan. The plan included not just profits, but jobs, training programs for electricians, equipment maintenance roles, and shared ownership models that returned dividends to residents. The project earned coverage in the local press, then the New York Times, then a short segment on NPR. Walter declined televised interviews. But people were starting to ask, who is Walter Ellis? Then came the email from a mid-sized financial magazine requesting an in-depth profile. Walter nearly deleted it, but Ethan convinced him. I think it's time, he said. The piece dropped 6 weeks later, The Janitor Who Outsmarted Wall Street. It included photos of Walter in his office, surrounded by books and models. No tie, just clarity in his eyes. Some readers assumed it was a myth. Others remembered W.D. Investor. A few traders who once mocked him began to whisper his name in boardrooms, this time with respect. And Walter? He simply went back to work. 1 week later, Ellis Capital acquired a controlling interest in a high-rise office building on Wall Street. The same one Walter had cleaned for 15 years. It made the news. Not because of the price, but because of the poetry. Walter didn't make a statement. He didn't need to. Instead, he hosted a quiet ceremony. Not for shareholders or the press, but for the janitorial staff. In a renovated break room on the 20th floor, he handed each worker a personalized folder. Inside, a letter of thanks, a certificate for free enrollment in Ellis Capital's financial literacy program, and a unique opportunity. Those who wanted could train for entry-level positions in finance under Walter's mentorship. One of them asked why. Walter smiled. Because I've stood where you stand. And with that, he walked into his office. The corner one. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Bookshelves heavy with wisdom. A photo of his mother above his desk, watching over him. There was no applause. No cameras. Just a man who had turned mops into models, footsteps into forecasts. And he was just getting started. The world had changed, but the air on Wall Street was still cold in the mornings. Walter stood in the lobby of his building now, watching the early risers pass through the turnstiles. Some nodded politely. Others didn't notice him at all, assuming he was just another executive in an understated suit. A few looked twice, as if trying to place the familiar curve of his jaw, the calm in his eyes. He never told them. Not yet. Upstairs, the executive team of Keller and Rowe, the firm where Brandon now worked, gathered for a tense meeting. The markets were wobbling again. Interest rates had shifted unexpectedly. Their exposure to speculative tech plays had turned into an anchor, and Brandon, now heading a mid-tier strategy group, was sweating through his collar. Outside the glass boardroom, Walter passed by silently. He paused, just for a breath, just long enough for Brandon to see him. Their eyes met. Recognition flickered. Disbelief followed. But Walter kept walking. He didn't need the confrontation. He didn't need to say a word. Behind him, Brandon's voice faltered during his presentation. Back in his office, Walter sat at his desk, sunlight pouring in behind him, and flipped open a ledger. On the left, investment opportunities for the coming quarter. On the right, a short list of names. Young interns, men's, janitors from buildings across the city who had taken him up on his offer to learn finance. One name in particular stood out. Dion. 17 years old. Harlem native. Fierce. Smart. She'd shown up to a workshop wearing second-hand sneakers and carrying a notebook packed with stock picks, margin notes, and a quote from Benjamin Graham scrawled across the inside cover. The intelligent investor is a realist who sells to optimists and buys from pessimists. Walter smiled when he saw it. He had done the same decades earlier. Now he met with her every Thursday. She asked sharp questions. She listened without pride. She reminded him of himself. Meanwhile, the city was shifting again. Rent was rising. Developers pushed into long-neglected neighborhoods. Families were being priced out of the very communities Walter had sworn to protect. He knew investment alone wasn't enough. He needed insulation, tools for preservation. And so he expanded Ellis Capital's mission. He launched the Harlem Stabilization Initiative, a public-private partnership offering low-interest home improvement loans to longtime residents, funded partially by returns from the firm's portfolio. Each loan came with a clause. Owners who stayed for 10 years paid no interest. Those who sold early paid it back in full. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. The press picked up on the story. This time, Walter agreed to an interview, audio only. His voice aired on a local radio show late one evening, calm, steady, unmistakably Harlem. "I didn't come back to Harlem to gentrify it," he said. "I came back to build a bridge. To keep the people here from being drowned by someone else's tide." Calls poured into the station. Emails followed. His inbox overflowed. But still he kept to his routine. Mornings in the office. Afternoons reviewing models. Evenings spent walking through neighborhoods, unnoticed in a coat and cap, listening to the rhythm of the streets. Sometimes he passed his old building in the Bronx. The super had replaced the elevator light. The corner bodega had closed, but a co-op cafe stood in its place. Walter had quietly financed it. He walked on. One evening as he turned onto his block, a woman called out, "Mr. Ellis?" He stopped, turned. It was Sharon Whitmore, a former tenant. She had lived down the hall from him for years, raising 3 boys while working nights at a hospital. They hadn't spoken in over a decade. "I heard it was you," she said, smiling. "Didn't believe it until someone showed me the article. Look at you now." Walter chuckled softly. "Still just walking to work, Sharon?" She nodded. "Yeah, but this time you walk different." They stood in silence for a moment. Then she said, "My youngest wants to be an economist." I didn't even know he knew what that was. Walter handed her his card. "Tell him to call me." She looked at it, then at him. "You really doing this, huh? Bringing it back home?" "I'm trying," he said, and he meant it. Later that week, the board of Keller and Rowe missed a critical rent payment on their floor. Cash flow had dried up. Investors pulled back. Walter, as the building's owner, reviewed the default notice with the same steady hand he once used to mop the floors outside their offices. The firm had 90 days to settle. He gave them 30. When the letter went out, Brandon stormed into the lobby, red-faced and flustered. He demanded a meeting. Security waved him through, unsure what to do. Brandon burst into Walter's office without knocking. "This is you?" he barked. "You're doing this to me?" Walter looked up slowly. "I'm enforcing a lease," he said. Brandon scoffed. "Don't act like this isn't personal." Walter leaned back in his chair. "Come, focused. When you laughed at me in the hallway, Brandon, I didn't take it personal. When you mocked me in front of your team, I didn't take it personal. But I don't run this firm to carry people who don't honor their obligations." Brandon faltered. Walter continued. "We're not evicting you because of who you are. We're evicting you because you stopped paying your bills. That's business. You should know that by now." Brandon left without another word. Walter returned to his work. He wasn't interested in revenge. He was building a legacy. The same week Keller and Rowe moved out, a new tenant moved in, a nonprofit focused on financial empowerment for underserved youth. Walter offered them the space at 1/3 of the market rate. In the lobby, a plaque was installed beneath the main directory. Ellis Building. Dedicated to those who rise no matter where they start. Walter passed it each morning. Never slowed. Never forgot. The 23rd floor of the Ellis Building had once been a cold maze of cubicles and glass. Numbers ran across screens, but warmth was nowhere to be found. Now, the hum of data terminals mixed with the quiet voices of students. It was called the Scholarship Floor. Walter launched it on a rainy morning in the fall of 2016. No press. No ceremony. Just a handwritten note taped to the elevator wall. New program, Financial Literacy and Investment Fundamentals. Open to staff, interns, and invited students. Tuesdays and Thursdays, 5 p.m. 23rd floor. By the end of the first week, 5 janitors, 2 receptionists, and 3 high school students from Harlem filled the room. By the 3rd week, 20 people showed up, many bringing friends. At the front of the class stood Walter, still dressed in a sharp but simple suit, chalk in hand, diagramming compound interest across a blackboard like it was a secret code waiting to be shared. "Money is a language," he told them. "If you never learn how to speak it, it'll always talk over you." The room nodded, pens moving, eyes wide. Walter didn't dumb anything down. He didn't believe in that. Instead, he broke things open, made them real. A dividend wasn't just a yield, it was a decision. A mortgage wasn't just a loan, it was a power structure. The market? A machine built by people, not magic. "Learn the rules," he said. "Then play better than they ever expected." He hired a team to expand the program. Former teachers, financial analysts who shared his vision, and community leaders with street credibility. They created modules on budgeting, taxes, retirement planning, stock fundamentals, and how to start a small business. Walter insisted every course be free, no prerequisites. Word spread. A barber from Crown Heights started attending. A line cook from Queens came after double shifts. A group of teen girls from the South Bronx began sitting in the front row every session, notebooks exploding with annotations. And in the center of it all, Walter. He still walked the halls, still greeted the janitors by name, still rode the elevator without pressing the top floor just to spark conversation. But the firm had changed. Ellis Capital now managed over $250 million in assets, specializing in long-horizon investments across infrastructure, renewable energy, and urban revitalization. Walter kept it lean, no bloated bonuses, no culture of excess. Salaries were solid, performance-based, and team-focused. Interns sat in on meetings. Analysts mentored receptionists. At the annual review, Walter addressed the entire staff in the atrium. "I don't care what school you went to," he said. "I care that you show up hungry, honest, and humble. We don't trade in flash. We invest in people, starting with our own." That year, he expanded the janitorial scholarship fund. Every full-time custodial worker in the building and their children could now apply for 4-year tuition coverage, any accredited university or vocational program. Applications poured in. Some of the same workers who had once scrubbed conference tables were now sitting beside analysts in night classes, learning portfolio theory and macroeconomics. There was resistance from outside, of course. Legacy firms grumbled that Ellis Capital was trying too hard to be noble. Some called it naive. Others dismissed it as marketing fluff. Walter didn't answer them. He was too busy laying the foundation for something deeper. In 2017, he acquired 3 more buildings, one in the Bronx, one in Queens, and one in Newark, each with the same model: affordable commercial space, mentorship programs, financial education hubs, and the same scholarship floor concept. He was building nodes of opportunity block by block. Back in Harlem, he launched Ellis Futures, a seed fund for young entrepreneurs of color, aged 16 to 25. The only requirement? A workable idea, a 2-page proposal, and a willingness to learn. One of the earliest grants went to Dion, now 18, whose fintech app helped families track shared expenses across generations. Walter reviewed her pitch himself. The code was basic. The model needed work. But the insight? Powerful. He gave her $15,000 and a desk on the 23rd floor. 3 months later, she had paying users. One evening, as he was leaving the building, Walter passed the lobby security desk. A new hire, a tall, soft-spoken man with tired eyes, nodded. "Good night, sir." Walter paused. "First week?" "Yeah," the man replied. "Was nervous at first. Then someone told me who you are. Said you used to, you know." He trailed off. Walter smiled. "I still clean things," he said. "Just different kinds of messes now." They both chuckled. Walter handed him a printed flyer, one of the scholarship floor session schedules. "If you're curious," he said, "stop by. Doors always open." The man took it like a passport. That night, Walter rode the elevator alone, all the way to the top. The city sparkled below, a grid of endless stories. He stepped into his office, where floor-to-ceiling glass framed the skyline, and walked past a wall covered in photos. Smiling workshop graduates, ribbon cuttings, signed thank you notes, newspaper clippings, and a single framed page from his first investment blog. WD Investor. October 2007. Look past the noise. Wealth whispers. He sat down at his desk, pulled out a fresh notebook, and began mapping the next 5 years. Not just for Ellis Capital, but for every hand reaching up from the bottom rung the way he once had. The morning was quiet on Wall Street. Autumn light poured down the steel and glass corridors, catching in the folds of tailored coats and bouncing off the polished shoes of passing executives. Inside the Ellis building, the lobby buzzed gently. Receptionists tapped on tablets. Elevator doors opened and closed in a quiet rhythm. Walter stepped in through the revolving doors, just as he had for over 20 years. But this morning was different. He wasn't rushing to beat the clock or hurrying past disinterested eyes. He wasn't carrying a mop bucket or wearing the navy blue jumpsuit with his name stitched in block letters. He wore a suit of charcoal wool. Sharp creases, crisp white shirt, slim burgundy tie. On his wrist, a vintage watch his mother once admired in a window but could never afford. It had taken him 30 years to find the same model. He wore it now not for timekeeping but as a memory. As he walked toward the elevator, employees nodded to him. A few straightened their backs as he passed. The young man at the security desk, the same one Walter had encouraged months ago, stood up a little taller when he saw him. "Mornin', Mr. Ellis." Walter smiled. "Morning, Jeremiah. You coming up to the session later?" "Wouldn't miss it." The elevator opened. Walter stepped inside, turned, and caught sight of a janitor buffing the marble floor. The man wore the same jumpsuit Walter had once worn. Same patch. Same worn gloves. Their eyes met. The janitor, a man maybe in his late 30s with sharp eyes and a tired posture, looked away quickly, used to being overlooked. But Walter didn't look away. He stepped out of the elevator before the doors could close, walked toward him, and said, "What's your name?" The man blinked. "Oh, Mark." Walter extended his hand. "Good to meet you, Mark. I'm Walter." Mark stared at the hand for a moment before shaking it. His grip was calloused, solid. Walter reached into his pocket and handed him a small card. "It's a flyer," he said. "We've got classes on the 23rd floor. Investment basics. No cost. You don't need to know anything going in. Just curiosity." Mark took the card slowly. "Thanks, but I'm not really. I didn't finish school." Walter gave him a warm smile. "Neither did I." He paused. "Never let the uniform define your limits." Then he nodded, turned, and stepped back into the elevator. As it rose, Walter looked out through the glass side panel. The city was still unfolding, still breathing, growing, forgetting, remembering. His skyline. His classroom. His old battlefield. On the top floor, his office was alive with light. The shelves were filled with the books he once read under flickering bulbs in his Bronx apartment. The Intelligent Investor, Principles, The Black Swan. Beside them were framed letters from students, photographs of his sister and her children, and a small stack of composition notebooks, corners worn, pages dense with equations. The newest addition was a large blueprint, his next project. The Ellis Foundation headquarters. A permanent home for education, outreach, and innovation. Not downtown but in Harlem. On the very block where he once sold newspapers to help pay for groceries. The land was already secured. The renderings were done. Ground would break in the spring. Walter sat behind his desk. He wasn't the man people had once ignored in the hallway. But he hadn't left him behind either. He carried that version of himself with him. The quiet one. The listener. The student sweeping dust under the desks of men who didn't know what they were looking at. Outside his window, the stock exchange unfurled its flag in the wind. Inside, a meeting with the board was about to begin. But before that, Walter reached for his notebook and wrote down a name. Mark, janitor, night shift. Invite to Thursday's session. He closed the notebook, adjusted his cuffs, and walked toward the conference room with the quiet confidence of a man who had swept the floors, studied the markets, bought the building, and then opened the doors for everyone behind him. He had not climbed a ladder. He had built one, and it stretched all the way back to the basement. The end. Here are 7 moral lessons drawn from this joy. 1. Your circumstances do not define your potential. Walter D. Ellis begins his journey not in a boardroom but in the shadows, pushing a mop through marble corridors dismissed by those around him. He doesn't have an Ivy League degree, a professional network, or a 6-figure salary. What he does have is curiosity, resilience, and an unshakable belief that his worth is not defined by his uniform. This lesson reminds us that greatness is not exclusive to privilege. Potential isn't reserved for those with wealth, titles, or polished resumes. It lies dormant in every soul willing to do the work, to learn quietly, and to endure ridicule with grace. Walter's story is proof that where you begin does not determine where you can go. 2. Humility is not weakness, it's strength and control. Throughout his rise, Walter never brags. He never retaliates with venom, even when mocked or dismissed. He moves with humility, not because he doubts himself, but because he doesn't need validation from people who measure value by titles or attire. Humility, in Walter's case, becomes a superpower. It allows him to listen more than he speaks, to absorb knowledge without ego, to build a business that uplifts others rather than simply glorifying himself. In a world obsessed with showing off, Walter's quiet confidence stands as a reminder that true strength often whispers. 3. Labor carries dignity, no work is beneath respect. Walter never once resents his job as a janitor. He scrubs toilets and polishes floors with care, even as those around him laugh behind glass doors. He does his work well not because it's prestigious but because it's his, and every job, no matter how humble, deserves dignity. This lesson challenges societal arrogance. The notion that people doing physical or low-status labor are somehow less intelligent or less valuable is not just cruel, it's wrong. Walter's journey shows us that brilliance may wear coveralls, and wisdom may carry a mop. True character is revealed not in job titles, but in how one carries themselves through every role. For knowledge is power, but only if you use it. Walter is more than a reader. He's a student of the market, a silent observer in the back of the room, collecting puzzle pieces and fitting them together when no one's watching. He doesn't just consume information, he applies it. He invests, tests, builds, and refines. The lesson here is critical. It's not what you know, it's what you do with what you know. Books can inspire, but action builds legacies. Walter's story invites us to stop hoarding information and start transforming it into strategy, into change, into impact. 5. Revenge doesn't have to be cruel to be satisfying. When Walter gains power, he doesn't seek to humiliate those who once mocked him. He doesn't ruin Brandon Keller. He simply holds him accountable, evicting his failed firm with professionalism, not malice. And instead of closing doors, Walter opens them for others like him, offering education, mentorship, and opportunity. There's a deeper revenge in success achieved with integrity. In proving the doubters wrong by thriving, not by gloating. In helping others rise instead of pushing them down. Walter's story teaches us that the sweetest victory is one that elevates, not crushes. 6. True wealth is measured in impact, not just dollars. By 2018, Walter owns the very building he once cleaned. But that's not his proudest achievement. His legacy is in the janitorial scholarships. In the 23rd floor's after-hours classrooms. In the young minds learning to build wealth in ways he never could at their age. Money in Walter's world is a tool, not a trophy. It's used to educate, to restore, to plant seeds in neighborhoods long ignored. This lesson speaks to all of us chasing success. Let your wealth echo beyond your account balance. Let it mean something. Let it build something that lives beyond you. 7. Lift as you climb. Perhaps the most powerful lesson of all is this: success that isn't shared is incomplete. Walter doesn't close the door behind him. He turns around, props it open, and lights the path for others. He creates programs for custodians, opens scholarship floors, funds startups from kids with dreams but no money. In every decision, he models the idea that climbing to the top means nothing if you forget those still at the bottom. This is more than generosity. It's justice. It's legacy. And it's the moral core of the entire story. You are not just what you become, you are what you help others become. In summary, Walter D. Ellis's life is a testament to perseverance, purpose, and quiet power. Each chapter in The Custodian of Wall Street is a blueprint for rising with integrity, for changing systems from within, and for doing so not with a shout, but with a steady, unrelenting march toward better. Let his story be a mirror and an invitation. No matter where you stand or what you wear, you are allowed to dream. And more importantly, you are allowed to rise. Disclaimer: this story is entirely fictional. It has been created solely for the purpose of providing moral lessons, motivation, inspiration, and meaningful learning experiences for viewers. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. Thank you so much for watching and listening to The Custodian of Wall Street. We hope Walter's journey inspired you to believe in your own strength, to never let circumstances define your future, and to remember that every step forward, no matter how quiet, is a step worth taking. If this story moved you, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. That way you won't miss out on more stories that uplift, motivate, and empower. And while you're here, why not explore some of our other videos? Each one is crafted to inspire, teach, and remind us all that greatness often comes from the most unexpected places. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to leave a comment below and share what part of Walter's story resonated with you the most. Until next time, keep believing, keep striving, and never stop rising.